Hi, I'm Jerry Hyde, Youth Services Manager at your Ames Public Library, and welcome to Well Read, a program about a little bit of this and a little bit of that at your library. Today, we are finishing up on our 5 early practices that stem from our early literacy skills of print motivation and print awareness and letter knowledge, narrative skills, vocabulary, and phonological awareness. And remember the other ones: play, talk, writing, and one more. There's singing. Oh, and how did I ever forget that one? One of my favorites that we do in toddler time all the time. All kind of come together to the overarching natural thing that you might, as an observer of library people and as a reader, a participant in the library, might think is the only reason why we're here. But reading, which is very, very important, is also one of those practices, and all those other things kind of build up to make that happen. And today I have Anastasia, one of our youth services librarian at the Ames Public Library here, and she's here, our expert in reading today. So hi, Anastasia. Thank you for coming.
Yes, you're welcome. It's good to be here.
And I understand that you think that, reading is important, but there's even more to reading than just reading the words that we see on our pages.
Yeah, I think many people, when they think about reading, they think about reading novels and they think about reading stories with their children. And I think for many people it stops there, or it never starts because they're like, I'm not interested in novels.
That's true.
And you know what? That's okay. We are not going to force anyone to read a novel, and we're not going to force anyone to read anything that they're not interested in. What our main goal, I would say, as librarians, is to communicate the message that reading is valuable and reading is enjoyable, and that when parents and adults have that sense and that belief, then that's communicated to the kids. And that may be communicated by reading novels, but it may be communicated by reading a cookbook to find out what you're going to make for dinner that night. Or it may be coming to the library to get a book on how to fix your house. And just that knowledge that print has that power to teach you, to bring you to a different place, to teach you something, your kids can pick up on that and find that valuable as well. So yeah, we just had pulled, there's lots of different things that reading can teach you. Can teach you how to get ready for a trip, about a different place, get you ready for a different experience. If you're gonna take your kids to a symphony, you might want to find a book about a symphony or about music. So there's lots of different topics that books and reading can help communicate. So that's
two things that come to my mind when you're sharing that. I would also say that reading is empowering.
Yes.
Because if we don't read, we all know, even those of us that read a lot, that when you are struggling with something and can't read or know what that word is, how hard that is. Many of us know where to go afterwards, or to try and figure that out, but sometimes you don't, and which kind of leads me to the other novels. They're pretty thick books.
Sometimes
and they can be very intimidating.
Yes.
So both of those words came to my mind: empowerment and intimidating. And one of the things that we want to do, like you said, is to empower people to enjoy reading and get that right book in the right hands.
Right. Yep.
And
the right
it isn't
book
always fiction.
Right. Yes. Yep. The right book for the right person, and that can be very broad. So that reading is valuable, and I would say also reading is enjoyable. And maybe that novel is not going to be enjoyable for you. Maybe it is. Maybe you just need some help finding the right novel, and we're happy and thrilled to help people with that too. But we have today we have such a variety of formats available to us too, and just the act of reading around your children makes a big impression on them. And
good role modeling.
Yeah, it is good role modeling, and it makes them very curious. They want everything that parents do, kids want to do. And so if you're reading a Sports Illustrated magazine, they're going to understand, oh, you know what, you can learn something or have fun by looking at print and engaging in something that's outside of yourself. So find something that's fun and interesting and enjoyable.
And I know we were just talking about breakfast, and
Yes.
we're talking about reading. And one of my most enjoyable times with my children and as a child was sitting around the breakfast table and reading the cereal box and joking
Yes.
about what was on it.
Yes.
And they're more so that way now, interactive than they were a couple of years ago when I was a child.
A couple years ago, yes.
And so they, just that act, so you don't have to even have a book. And I noticed you also have an iPad with
did,
you.
yep.
So, there's that whole additional part that we can start reading, and that is reading as well. And I know there's lots of different discussions out in the academic world and the professional
Yes.
world about whether or not that should be considered reading or not, or playing games on your Nintendo or whatever the popular
Right.
thing is, the platform is for now. But even that, that has a certain skill of reading. So if your child likes to play those games, not that I'm, thinking they should play all day, but they are reading, and they are following
Right.
a higher skill of reading
Right.
with the discussion or directions.
Right.
To follow those directions is a higher skill level than even just sitting and enjoying a novel. Both very important.
Right.
But that is a way of reading. And now not everybody necessarily agrees with that. But those games that they're playing on television or on the computer, they have to read along with them.
Right. Yeah, there are some skills that are, they're exercising and practicing and building. And I think it's definitely true that the research is still out on exactly how tablets, electronics affect our kids. The one thing that is clear is if the parent is interacting with the child, whether it's a book or an iPad, that's where the valuable comes. So if you're reading a book on your iPad with your child, or you're playing a game with your child on the iPad, it's the talking about what's going on, it's the pointing out the print on the page, and that's where they're getting a lot of their the value there. So it's like your value added piece, whether you're reading on an iPad or reading on a magazine.
Right.
So that's our
And
big encouragement to parents, is keep interacting with your kids no matter what you're
So these skills can be
using.
done on an iPad as easily as it can be done on. So one of those ways, just like you don't just hand a book to a toddler, and sometimes we do, so they can pretend reading and gain that experience.
Yeah.
At times we do that. We just don't hand that iPad or that iPhone or that device to the child and say, go to it. In the
Right.
same way with older kids as well. I mean, just to
Yeah.
let them sit down and play the game with your child and have conversations, and that like you said,
Right,
that
the
interaction is
conversations.
what's important.
Yeah.
With that.
And that's, so when you're reading with your kids, the interaction is so important, and it can take a lot of different forms. It can be just pointing out what's on the page. It can be talking about what's on the page, relating to what the kids have done that day. My favorite thing is actually to talk about breakfast, and like we were reading a farm book yesterday. Farmer Brown was eating breakfast, and so then we talk with the kids about what they had for breakfast, and so they start to understand that what's in the books is reflective of life, and that relating really helps them to understand what's going on more. So talking about that is really valuable too.
And it all begins way back in the very, very beginning, when that baby, and some say that even in
utero,
in utero, that you are starting that conversation and starting that learning for your child. But even as young as a newborn infant, it's important for them to be read to and to have conversations with, and to have that experience. And that could be just chewing on the book, which is my favorite, that they get to chew on the book, and that's their very first chewing experience. That's their very first reading experience.
Yeah.
So it should be a positive one. And so, screaming, get that book out, is not necessarily the way you should do it.
Right.
Now, of course, if you don't want them to chew on the book, there's ways of,
Right. You could say it
exchanging.
gently, and yes, give the pacifier instead, or a block to chew on, or something.
And still making that, but truly that chewing for an infant or a toddler on that book is their way of reading. And it's wonderful.
I just learned like a couple years ago that the inside of their mouth is the most sensitive part of their whole body, and so they get the most information about that object by putting it in their mouth.
their mouth.
That's why they do it.
That's
it's
why
not
they
just
do.
because they're teething. It's because they want the most information they can
Right.
possibly get about
and
anything.
they're exploring and,
Yeah.
and looking at their world. One book that I, as you know, is one of my favorite books that I would recommend to adults and grandparents and anyone that's interested in children that and learning their skills. And they do a very nice job about how to read to each age group. So that infant obviously is a little bit easier to read to than that movable toddler.
Right.
But
Yeah.
letting that toddler run around and read out loud at the same time is
Yeah,
a very
they're still
important.
listening.
They're
Yeah.
still listening. It talks also about the importance of the words that you find, you know, the rare words and the common words, that in a picture book you find more rare words. Boy, that's a very
It's
hard
hard
thing
to
to
say.
say. In a picture book than you do in a day-to-day conversation. So that is important for a child, and to be read to as much as possible. Not to the as much as possible as, you know, making it they're crying and they don't want and they're
Right.
frustrated, knowing to stop at that time. And I know that you have some favorite books here too, so can
do.
you share and explain why you think they're your favorite books?
Sure.
Or why you know they're your favorite books?
Yes. So this book is called Book, which is a very simple title, but it just shows this child who has received a book for a present and is very, very
gonna
excited
open
about
it.
this book, and decides to carry it around with, we actually don't know if it's a boy or girl, so him or her. And it becomes just part of his or her day, and that, you know, likes to share it with the cat and take it on his games. And so it's a great way to show how fun a book can be, and how a book can be a friend and a toy, as well as an educational piece. So yes, here he's wearing it like a hat, and so it is his toy. And but it is also something that he wants to share with other people. So books can be a lot of different things for your kids and for your family. And so we would really encourage everyone to have some books that your kids can access all the time, and they can carry them around outside and underneath the table and everything. And maybe you have another set of books that you keep separate that you don't want torn up, and you just bring those out for mom and dad time, and that's fine too. But just to have some books that you can play with. And this book just represents the joy, and then at the very end of the day, he takes it to bed. So it is truly a companion, and a good book can be a companion for your whole day. So that's why I love
And a
that
comfort.
one.
This is a great book, and I love the way, because I think that's one of the things kids like to do with books too, and us adults like to
Yeah.
play with books too. And I occasionally have put a book on my head, and, and I think all of us have. you
Yes.
know? Hi.
Why not?
And it's fun to play.
Yes.
So,
Yes.
a very good book. I like it too.
Yes. This one is another favorite of mine, Click Clack Moo, Cows That Type, and it has more, I'd say, sophisticated humor in that there are actually cows typing on a typewriter. And so this would be an example of one that I love personally, and so I love to share it. And even if kids don't know what typewriters are, they can get some joy out of reading the book with me because my joy is there. So I'd encourage parents to find books that they think are funny and amusing, or maybe a classic that they read as a child, such as Ferdinand or The Very Hungry Caterpillar. We always are finding parents books that they liked as a kid, and that can pass on that joy as well. Sometimes, though,
Yeah.
your child is not interested in the books that you are interested in, and all they want is pink and glitter. And
And fairy tales and,
fairy
queens
tales.
and
Yes.
princesses.
Yes. And so we have books like that as well, and we do encourage you to follow your child's interests, and that is part of what we call print motivation, using our skill terminology over here, that if kids enjoy books, they're going to be more likely to have fun reading and more likely to be successful as reading. So following their interests, whether it's pink and glitter or whether it's a farting dog,
A very
yes, it's worthwhile. It's worthwhile to find those books for your kids and spend time sharing them.
And I know as librarians, we always talk about the right book at the right time,
Yeah.
for the right reader. And this one, I know really reluctant readers really like this because it's something that that people talk about or happen in real life.
Right, yeah,
and it's
exactly.
funny.
Yes.
And we want it to be enjoyable. It's not, again, it's not one of my favorite books, but it's a good book to hook in and get readers reading.
Right, and we have that type of book at every level. We have the Captain Underpants at the beginning reader, graphic novels, and
adults have these types of books too.
Yes.
So I mean, it is not unique. We
I
at
know.
all ages need something. There are people for the books that have this type of humor in it. There are people that need those fantasy, let's escape,
Right, yep.
and go into that world. I mean, books satisfy a lot of needs, and why should children be any different?
Right.
Because they have a variety of needs as well. And so reading aloud, you should let your child self-select as well.
Yep.
It is,
And that's why we have the bins,
bins.
so that the children can flip through and find ones that are interesting to them.
and that doesn't mean necessarily that they should do the only selecting. You
Right.
can throw in a couple of the books that you're motivated to read and have, and again, just like we do in adult life,
Yeah.
we make choices about what we want to read or not to read, and it's also okay to put it back on the shelf or return it to the library and not read it at all
Yeah.
after you've read it. So to yourself. So
Yeah. One other thing about following your children's lead, this book here, The Animals Up Close.
oh yes, this one.
Yeah. So there's a 6-year-old boy that I babysit who really loves animals, and he loves learning about animals and where they live and what they do. And so whenever I go, I always go to find a book that has photographs of real animals, and this would be an example. And I mean, he will sit and read
Yeah.
that kind of book for a long time. And so
And how old did you say he was?
he is 6.
So a 6-year-old really isn't going to be reading this
No.
print, but the illustrations are awesome.
Yes.
And so the 6-year-old or 4-year-old or 3-year-old would really enjoy this book if that's the topic they're interested in.
Right.
So sometimes I think we tend to limit ourselves or limit our children because we don't feel that the print is where it should be, and because it should be readable for them, and that's not necessarily the
yeah.
case. And this particular publisher and Eyewitness Books are really good at having those little snippets of information, and I always find them very let me do print awareness here, right
Yep.
up and down here. I always find these books very interesting for me as an adult, because I find out lots of little snippets of information that I don't
Right.
have to go to a really long, because I'm not doing a report or researching something. I'm just finding little conversation pieces,
Right.
possibly. So
Yeah.
it's really empowering for a parent to look to for them to look like they know everything to their child, and when in fact they're just reading something on the
yep.
book. So a great way to include different vocabulary building,
Right, that too.
conversation building, information experience for your child before they're really actually ready to read a book like this on their own.
Right, to read all the text.
So
I think
reading
that-
is very, very important, no matter who we are, whether we're infants or adults or in between. We need it to be successful in life, in whatever we're doing. There's not something in our world around us that we don't read. And so I can't imagine not being able to read. I know we haven't really talked about English as a second language, but reading print in different ways. Picture books are great to do those little book reading talks.
Right, you can read the picture book without
Picture
ever
book.
doing the words that are on the
in
page.
your own language or
Yes.
your home language. And so there's even ways for us to empower those that don't read English, and even those that aren't literate can take a book and read the pictures to their child. And we have books on CDs where you can do both things, listen and read along. So there's wonderful ways, even for the readers that don't like to read or the readers that are unable to read, to empower their children to read. So a very wonderful skill to have, a wonderful way to empower your child to be successful in life. So
Yeah.
Thank you, Anastasia, for coming in and talking about reading. I know we're all very passionate about our early practices and early literacy skills here at the Ames Public Library, and we're all ready to talk with any parent that comes in or any grandparent that comes in, anybody that doesn't have children. We'll talk to them about reading.
Babysitters and everything.
We're really wanting to empower our community to maybe read the novels, maybe read a cookbook, maybe look at the pictures and talk. So just so we get those books in our hands, whether it's iPad or in hard
Paper
copy.
format, yep.
So thank you very much for coming. And remember, this is our last of our 5-part series of our early practices, and but that doesn't mean that it's the end of what you can do as our viewers of our program. So come on in, visit us, get a book, and have a conversation with one of us at the Youth Services desk, and we'll make sure that you're empowered to go home and read, whether it's to your own child or to your grandchild or that neighbor child or someone that you see at the park or on the bus. All those places are very important, and you never know if that child has a reader in their life or not. So be a good role model and a mentor, and read to your child or read to a child in your family community. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.